The universe holds its breath before extinction. 12 warships of the Trifaction Defense Fleet hung in the void like steel monuments to human arrogance, their hulls gleaming with the reflected light of a dying star. They had been sent to eliminate a single target, a threat so severe that the combined military councils of three star systems had authorized the deployment of enough firepower to crack a small moon. 7,200 soldiers aboard those vessels believed they were humanity's final line of defense against annihilation. They were wrong about many things that day, but most of all they were wrong about who the real monster was. She emerged from the darkness between stars like a goddess born from nightmare. Her skin shimmered with silver luminescence, her eyes blazing with violet fire that seemed to contain entire galaxies of pain and fury. Hair like living strands of the aurora borealis trailed behind her as she moved through the vacuum with impossible grace. No suit, no ship. Nothing but her own terrible magnificence, standing between her and the absolute zero of space. The fleet commander had time to whisper a prayer to whatever god still listened to men who made weapons of living souls before the first beam of psionic energy tore his flagship in half. The battle lasted 4 minutes and 37 seconds. Military historians would later debate whether it could even be called a battle or whether massacre was the more accurate term. Ship after ship erupted into cascading fireballs as violet lightning arced between them, their shields worthless, their weapons firing uselessly into the void as the Silver Woman danced through their formations like death itself given form. Escape pods launched in desperate clusters, only to be swatted aside by waves of force that crushed them into metal coffins. The screaming on the communication channels lasted longer than the ships themselves. Voices crying out for mercy, for help, for mothers and fathers and children who would never know how their loved ones died. When the last vessel broke apart and scattered its burning debris across the cosmic darkness, she floated among the wreckage, her chest heaving, her violet eyes dimming as something that might have been grief passed across her alien features. 7,200 souls extinguished in less time than it took to brew a cup of coffee. The Umbral Sovereign, they called her, the galaxy's ultimate weapon, the monster who ended wars by ending everything. But monsters do not weep, and in the silence between the dying stars surrounded by the ashes of her latest atrocity, Seraphine Vale wept. The image shattered. A different scene materialized from the fragments of memory and prophecy. The same Silver Woman but transformed. Her luminous skin had faded to a sickly gray. Her magnificent hair hung limp and colorless around a face contorted with desperation. She knelt on a metal floor, her hands pressed together in supplication, her entire body trembling with the effort of containing something terrible within herself. Violet cracks ran along her arms like fault lines, in reality pulsing with unstable energy that threatened to tear her apart from the inside out. Her voice emerged broken, stripped of all the terrible majesty that had made admirals tremble and emperors sue for peace. It was the voice of something wounded, something afraid, something that had finally found the limit of its own terrible power. Please save me. The vision collapsed into darkness, and Colonel Jack Mercer woke up gasping in his bunk, his 62-year-old heart hammering against his ribs like it was trying to escape his chest. The same dream, the same impossible sequence of images that had haunted his sleep for the past 3 nights. He pressed his palms against his eyes and waited for the trembling to stop, for his breathing to slow, for the rational part of his mind to reassert control over the primitive animal terror that the dream always left behind. Just a dream. Nothing more. The isolation was getting to him, that was all. 15 years alone on the edge of charted space would drive anyone to strange nocturnal visions. The clock on his wall read 0500 hours station time. His body had woken him exactly on schedule, the same way it had every morning for the past 4 decades. Some habits went deeper than conscious thought, carved into the neurons by years of military discipline, until they became as automatic as breathing. Colonel Jack Mercer of the United States Air Force retired disgraced and exiled to the farthest corner of human civilization. Still woke up at 5 in the morning like he was due on the flight line at Edwards. He swung his legs over the side of the bunk and sat there for a moment, letting his eyes adjust to the dim emergency lighting that served as Outpost 17's approximation of dawn. His quarters were Spartan, even by military standards, a 10 by 12 metal box containing a bunk, a desk, a small sanitary alcove, and precisely nothing that could be called a personal touch. The only decoration, if it could be called that, was a battered metal case that sat on his desk, its surface scratched and dented from decades of use. Inside that case, wrapped in cloth that had once been his dress uniform shirt, lay the dog tags of General Thomas Mercer. His father, a man who had died with secrets that Jack was only beginning to understand. Morning routine, the ritual that kept him sane when sanity seemed like an increasingly optional concept. Jack moved through the exercises with mechanical precision, push-ups and sit-ups and stretches that had been designed for astronaut training half a century ago. His body protested each movement with the accumulated complaints of 6 decades joints that creaked, muscles that ached, a lower back that had never fully recovered from the ejection that ended his flying career. But pain was just the body's way of reminding you that you were still alive. And Jack had learned long ago to treat that particular reminder as a gift rather than a curse. Shower, shave. The face that looked back at him from the small mirror was a roadmap of hard years and harder choices. Deep lines carved around eyes that had seen too much, a jaw that had learned to clench against words better, left unspoken gray hair, cropped short in a style that the Air Force had standardized before he was born. He was not a handsome man, had never been, but there was something in that weathered face that spoke of endurance, of a will that had been tested by fire and had refused to break. Breakfast was a nutrition pack consumed standing at his workstation while he reviewed the overnight sensor logs. Outpost 17 monitored a sector of space so remote that traffic was measured in ships per month rather than ships per day. The station had been built as a waypoint for deep space exploration missions that budget cuts had canceled decades ago, and now it served primarily as a navigation beacon, an emergency refueling depot for the occasional cargo hauler or research vessel that strayed this far from civilization. Jack's official title was Chief Maintenance Engineer, which was a fancy way of saying that he was responsible for keeping the lights on and the air flowing in a facility that the colonial administration had largely forgotten existed. The sensor logs showed nothing unusual. A cargo hauler had passed through the sector 3 days ago without stopping. A small asteroid had drifted close enough to trigger the collision warning systems before continuing on its eternal journey through the void. The background radiation levels were within normal parameters. All systems were functioning within acceptable tolerances. Normal, quiet, exactly the way Jack preferred it, and exactly the way it had been for 15 years, ever since the tribunal had stripped him of his command and offered him the choice between this exile and a court-martial that would have destroyed what little remained of his reputation. He had taken the exile without complaint, had accepted his banishment to the edge of nowhere as the just punishment for a mistake that had cost 47 people their lives. The Bengalo Rift incident. Even now, 15 years later, the memory made his stomach clench with guilt and grief. An experimental wormhole generator, a calculated risk that had gone catastrophically wrong, and 47 scientists and technicians who had trusted him with their lives reduced to scattered atoms in the space between dimensions. The official report blamed equipment failure, and the unofficial consensus blamed Colonel Jack Mercer's decision to proceed with the test despite warning signs that he should have heeded. He had never contested either conclusion because the truth was that the responsibility was his, had always been his, would always be his, regardless of what the tribunals decided or the historians eventually concluded. 47 lives. He carried them with him every day, a weight that no amount of time or distance could diminish. Their names were engraved on the inside of his father's dog tag case, tiny letters that he traced with his fingers every night before sleep, a ritual of remembrance that had become as essential to him as breathing. The communication console chirped with an incoming message, pulling him out of his morning contemplation of ancient guilt. He recognized the encryption signature before he saw the sender identification. Maya Chen, lieutenant, currently assigned to the Defense Coordination Center at Armstrong Station, 3 days travel from Outpost 17 at standard cruising speed. The young woman who had somehow decided that a disgraced old colonel was worth maintaining contact with despite the career risks that association with him entailed. Jack opened the message and felt something warm crack through the ice that had formed around his heart over the past 15 years. Her face appeared on his screen, young and bright and fierce, with the kind of idealism that he remembered having once before the universe had taught him the price of hope. She was wearing her duty uniform, which meant she had recorded this message during a break in her shift, stealing precious minutes from her schedule to check on an old man who had no claim on her attention. Colonel Mercer, I hope this message finds you well. I wanted to let you know that I successfully implemented the modifications you suggested to the station's point defense targeting array. The accuracy improvements are even better than your projections, about 12% above baseline. Commander Harrison has noticed and is asking questions about where I learned the technique. I haven't told him yet. I'm not sure how he would react to knowing that his junior tactical officer is receiving private tutoring from the infamous Butcher of Bengalo. Jack winced at the nickname. He had never grown accustomed to it, even though he knew that Maya used it with deliberate irony, a way of defanging the insult by claiming it as a joke between friends. Anyway, I'm transmitting the calibration data along with this message. I had some questions about the compensator algorithms that I was hoping you could clarify. Also, sir, I noticed something odd in the long-range sensor feeds that I wanted to bring to your attention. Probably nothing, but there's been some unusual activity in the outer sectors over the past few weeks. Ship movements that don't match any registered traffic patterns. Fleet intelligence is dismissing it as smuggler activity, but the signatures don't look right to me. They're too organized, too purposeful. I thought you might want to keep an eye on your local sensors just in case. She paused and something shifted in her expression, the professional distance giving way to something more personal. Take care of yourself, sir. I know you think you deserve to be out there alone, but some of us disagree. Some of us think you deserve a lot better than what they gave you. Message me back when you can. Chen out. The screen went dark, and Jack sat for a long moment in the silence of his empty station, processing the conflicting emotions that Maya's messages always stirred in him. She reminded him of himself at that age, brilliant and ambitious and convinced that hard work and integrity would be enough to navigate the treacherous waters of military politics. He had been wrong about that, spectacularly wrong, and part of him wanted to warn her away from the same mistakes while another part recognized that some lessons could only be learned through experience. He pulled up the calibration data she had sent and began reviewing her work, making notes on the areas where her analysis could be refined and the areas where her instincts had already surpassed his own technical training. The girl was good, probably the best systems analyst he had encountered in his entire career, and the fact that she was wasting her potential on defense coordination at a secondary station was a crime against the service that had never appreciated true talent. But that was not his call to make, not anymore. Not since the tribunal had stripped him of any authority to influence the trajectory of promising young officers. 3 hours passed in the comfortable routine of technical analysis and problem solving. Jack lost himself in the elegant mathematics of sensor calibration, in the precise language of algorithms and frequencies and detection thresholds. This was what he was good at, had always been good at the practical application of theoretical knowledge to solve concrete problems. Flying had been his first love, but engineering had become his salvation during the long years of exile. The proximity alarm shattered his concentration with a priority alert that he had never heard before in 15 years of service at Outpost 17. He was at the sensor console in 3 strides, his fingers flying across the interface as he pulled up the detection data that had triggered the warning. Something was approaching the station. Something that did not match any signature profile in his database. The object was too small to be a ship, but too large and too energetic to be debris. Its velocity was impossible faster than any known propulsion technology could achieve without tearing apart from the acceleration stress. And its trajectory was not the random drift of space junk or the calculated curve of a vessel on approach. It was coming straight at Outpost 17 like an arrow fired from a bow, like something that knew exactly where it was going and was in a terrible hurry to get there. Jack ran the sensor data through every filter and analysis protocol available to him, his training taking over as he worked to identify the threat and assess the appropriate response. The object's energy signature was off-the-charts readings that should have indicated a small nuclear detonation, but somehow remained stable, contained, controlled. Its mass was negligible, barely more than a human body, but its power output rivaled a destroyer's main reactor. Not possible. The readings could not be accurate. He recalibrated the sensors and ran the analysis again, then a third time, and each iteration returned the same impossible results. Something that weighed as much as a woman and generated as much power as a warship was approaching its station at speeds that made a mockery of physics, and he had approximately 7 minutes before it arrived. Jack found himself reaching for a weapon he had not carried in 15 years. His hand closed on empty air, and he cursed under his breath as he crossed to the emergency locker and retrieved the sidearm that station regulations required him to keep accessible, but that he had never expected to use. The weight of the gun felt strange in his grip, foreign and familiar, at the same time a reminder of a life he had left behind when he accepted his exile to the edge of nowhere. The proximity alarm shifted pitch as the object began its deceleration approach. Whatever was coming, it was not going to crash into the station. It was going to land, to dock, to come aboard. Jack positioned himself in the corridor outside the main airlock, his weapon raised and his heart pounding with the adrenaline surge that he had not felt since his last combat mission 30 years ago. The airlock's outer door cycled with a hiss of equalizing pressure, followed by a long moment of silence that stretched his nerves to the breaking point. Then the inner door opened, and Jack Mercer found himself face to face with the most beautiful and terrifying sight he had ever witnessed. She stood in the airlock threshold like something out of myth, a silver goddess with violet stars burning in her eyes and living light cascading down her shoulders in place of hair. Her skin gleamed with an inner luminescence that made the station's harsh lighting seem dim and primitive by comparison. She was tall, taller than him by several inches, and built with a lethal elegance that spoke of power held in perfect control. Every line of her form suggested capability, from the subtle tension in her shoulders to the predatory grace of her stance. Jack's weapon remained steady despite the tremor that wanted to shake his entire body. He had seen her face before in classified briefings, in warning bulletins and nightmares that he had dismissed as stress reactions. The Umbral Sovereign, the galaxy's most dangerous alien. The weapon that had ended the Confederation War by making the concept of warfare obsolete against an enemy that could annihilate entire fleets without breaking a sweat. She was standing in his airlock, and she was looking at him with those impossible violet eyes, and she was not attacking. Colonel Jack Mercer. Her voice was music and thunder, beautiful and terrible in equal measure, and somehow familiar in a way that he could not quite identify. I am not here to harm you. I am here because you are the only person in the galaxy who can save me, and if I am not saved, 83 million people will die. His finger tightened on the trigger before his conscious mind could override the instinct. Years of training screamed at him to fire to neutralize the threat, to do whatever was necessary to survive the encounter with a being that could allegedly tear warships apart with a thought. But something in her voice gave him pause, something that sounded almost like desperation, almost like fear. That weapon cannot hurt me. She spoke without arrogance, simply stating a fact that both of them already knew. But I will not stop you from pulling the trigger if that is what you need to feel safe. I understand fear, Colonel. I have caused more of it than any being should ever have to carry. I am asking you to look past that fear just for a moment and listen to what I have to say. Jack's aim did not waver, but he also did not fire. 20 seconds passed in silence as he studied the creature before him, searching for some sign of deception, some indication that this was a trap or a trick or some elaborate alien game that would end with his death. He found nothing but exhaustion and something that looked disturbingly like hope. Talk fast and stay exactly where you are. She inclined her head in acknowledgement of his conditions, a surprisingly human gesture from something so fundamentally inhuman. My name is Seraphine Vael. I was created 23 years ago by an organization called the Umbral Collective as a living weapon, a fusion of psionic energy and biological engineering designed to end wars through overwhelming force. I have done terrible things in those 23 years, Colonel. Things that wake me in the night, things that have earned me every terrible name that the galaxy has given me. But I did not come here to discuss my crimes. I came here because I am dying. Jack watched violet lightning crawl beneath her silver skin, saw the way her jaw clenched against what was obviously intense pain. The readings from his sensor scan had not been wrong. She was generating enough energy to power a small city, and that energy was consuming her from the inside out. The psionic core that gives me my power is destabilizing. My creators engineered me without fail-safes, without any mechanism to contain or redirect the energy if it exceeded design parameters. That was intentional, Colonel. They wanted me to be disposable. They wanted the option to let me burn out once I had served my purpose. Her voice carried no self-pity, only a cold statement of facts that she had clearly made her peace with long ago. The destabilization began 6 weeks ago. I have done everything within my power to slow the process, but I have reached the limit of what I can achieve alone. In approximately 6 hours, the containment will fail completely, and the resulting detonation will extend from this station to the nearest star cluster. The numbers ran through Jack's head automatically, the product of decades of training in threat assessment and damage calculation. A blast radius that large would encompass at least a dozen inhabited systems, hundreds of stations and outposts, millions upon millions of people going about their daily lives with the idea that extinction was hurtling toward them at the speed of light. Why here? Why me? Because your father created the only device capable of stabilizing my core. Seraphine's violet eyes held his gaze with an intensity that made his soul feel exposed. The quantum nullifier. It was designed to neutralize unstable energy fields to create zones of enforced stability in regions of quantum flux. Your father built it as a safety mechanism for experimental wormhole research, but the underlying technology is exactly what I need to survive. And you, Colonel Mercer, are the only person in the galaxy who truly understands how to operate it. Jack felt the blood drain from his face. The nullifier was a ghost from his past, a reminder of the project that had ended in disaster and disgrace and 47 deaths. It had been decommissioned after the Bengalo Rift incident, locked away in secure storage, along with all the other remnants of research that had been deemed too dangerous to continue. The official records stated that it had been destroyed. How do you know about the nullifier? That project was classified beyond anything you should have had access to. I know many things that I should not know, Colonel. I have spent 23 years as a weapon pointed at the galaxy's enemies, and weapons learn the secrets of those who wield them, whether they intend to share them or not. She took a single step forward, and Jack's weapon tracked her movement automatically. I also know that the nullifier was not destroyed. I know that it was transferred to this station 15 years ago, disguised as decommissioned equipment, hidden here by a man who believed it might someday be needed. I know that man was your father, and I know that he left it here for you. The revelation hit Jack like a physical blow. His father had been dead for 20 years, killed in a shuttle accident that the family had always suspected was not entirely accidental. The idea that Thomas Mercer had been orchestrating events from beyond the grave, that he had somehow arranged for his disgraced son to be exiled to the exact location where a crucial piece of technology had been hidden, was almost too much to process. Before he could respond, the station's sensor array erupted with multiple proximity warnings. Jack's eyes snapped to the wall display, and his heart dropped into his stomach as he processed the new information. 5 vessels had just dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the station's detection range. 5 warships bearing the distinctive angular hull design that he had seen in intelligence briefings throughout his career. Umbral Collective, the same organization that had created the woman standing in his airlock. And they were coming fast, their trajectories converging on Outpost 9. Outpost 17 with unmistakable hostile intent. They found me faster than I anticipated. Seraphine's voice carried a note of genuine concern for the first time since her arrival. I led them on a chase through 3 sectors before coming here, but it appears I underestimated their tracking capabilities. Jack was already moving his training, taking over as he processed the tactical situation. 5 warships against a station with minimal defensive capabilities. No chance of reinforcement, no possibility of escape. The only variable was the alien weapon standing in his corridor, and she had just admitted that she was dying. Who's commanding that fleet? Admiral Victor Kessler. The name hit Jack like a bullet to the chest. Victor Kessler, the man he had served beside during the Outer Rim campaigns, the man he had pulled from a burning cockpit during the ambush at Proxima Station, the man who had stood as best man at his wedding and held his hand during his wife's funeral. Victor Kessler, who had vanished from military service 12 years ago and had apparently resurfaced as a high-ranking officer in the organization responsible for creating living weapons of mass destruction. Victor, Jack whispered the name like a curse, like a prayer, like the death of something he had believed in for 30 years. He's with them. He commands them. Seraphine's violet eyes showed something that might have been sympathy. I see that you knew him. I am sorry to be the one to tell you of his current allegiance, but there is no time for the shock you are feeling. Kessler will reach this station in approximately 4 hours, and when he does, he will not negotiate. He wants me alive, Colonel. He wants to use me to control me, to point me at his enemies, and pull the trigger whenever it suits his purposes. If he succeeds, the death toll will not be limited to 83 million. It will be billions, trillions, every living soul that stands between the Umbral Collective and their vision of galactic order. Jack's mind raced through possibilities and probabilities, calculating odds and assessing options with the cold precision that had made him one of the best tactical minds in the fleet before his fall from grace. The math was not encouraging. Even if Seraphine was capable of fighting at full capacity, which she clearly was not taking on 5 warships, was a tall order, and the station's defenses were designed to deter pirates and handle minor threats, not repel a full military assault. Why should I help you? The question emerged harsh and bitter, carrying 15 years of suppressed anger at a universe that had taken everything from him. You just told me you're a weapon that's killed God knows how many people. Why should I lift a finger to save the galaxy's most notorious mass murderer? Seraphine did not flinch from the accusation. Because I do not wish to be what they made me. Because I have spent 23 years trying to find a way to stop being a monster, and this is the closest I have ever come. Because 83 million innocent people will die if you do not help me, and whatever crimes I have committed, those people do not deserve to burn for my sins. She took another step toward him, close enough now that he could see the fine tremors running through her body, the visible effort she was expending to maintain her composure against the pain of her failing containment. And because your father believed in second chances, Colonel, he believed that even the most terrible mistakes could be redeemed if someone was willing to do the work. He believed it strongly enough to hide the nullifier here to arrange for your assignment to the station, to leave behind the tools you would need when the moment came. I am asking you to honor his faith, not in me, Oisam, in you. Jack lowered his weapon. He did not holster. It was not ready for that level of trust, but he let the barrel drop until it pointed at the floor instead of her chest. The gesture was small, but it was enough. The nullifier is in the secure storage bay on level 3. I haven't powered it up in years, and I have no idea if it's still functional. Even if it is, calibrating it for your specific energy signature will take time we may not have. And using it is dangerous. The original design was never meant for biological applications. If something goes wrong, the feedback could destroy you and the station both. I accept those risks. You might not have a choice. I might not be able to save you even if everything goes perfectly. Seraphine's silver lips curved into something that was almost a smile. Colonel Mercer, I have been living on borrowed time since the moment of my creation. Every day that I wake up and choose not to be the monster they designed is a day that I have stolen from the fate they intended for me. If this is where my borrowed time runs out, then at least it will end with me trying to do something good. That is more than I ever expected to have. Jack studied her for a long moment, searching her alien features for some sign of deception and finding only exhaustion and determination, and something that looked disturbingly like peace. She had made her peace with death, he realized. She had come here prepared to die, hoping for salvation, but accepting annihilation as an equally valid outcome. It was the most human thing he had ever seen from something so fundamentally inhuman. Follow me, and stay close. If Kessler is tracking you, he might have advanced scouts already in the system. They moved through the station's quarters in tense silence, Jack leading with his weapon ready, and Seraphine following a few steps behind. The overhead lights flickered as they passed, responding to the unstable energy field that surrounded her like a corona of barely controlled destruction. Jack could feel the hairs on his arms standing up, could sense the raw power radiating from her body like heat from a furnace. The secure storage bay was exactly as he had left it 15 years ago, a reinforced chamber at the heart of the station's structure, designed to house hazardous materials and sensitive equipment. The nullifier sat in its containment crate like a sleeping dragon, a sphere of gleaming metal wrapped in rings of faintly glowing sigils that his father had designed based on mathematics that Jack had never fully understood. Even dormant, it hummed with potential energy, a promise of power waiting to be unleashed. Jack approached the crate and began the unlocking sequence, his fingers moving through the combination that he had never written down and never forgotten. The seals released with a hiss of pressurized gas, and the lid lifted to reveal the device that had been at the center of his greatest triumph and his greatest tragedy. It looked smaller than I expected. Seraphine's voice was soft, almost reverent. Such a small thing to hold so much hope. Jack ran his hands over the nullifier's surface, checking for damage, feeling the subtle vibration of its dormant systems. My father spent 20 years developing the theory behind this thing. He believed that quantum instability was the key to everything from faster-than-light travel to unlimited energy generation. The nullifier was supposed to be his proof of concept, a way to demonstrate that unstable fields could be controlled rather than simply avoided. His fingers found a seam in the device's housing, and he pressed the release that opened the access panel. Inside, nestled among the complex circuitry and crystalline power conduits, was a small data chip that should not have been there. Jack removed the chip with trembling hands and inserted it into his personal tablet. A message began to play, and the voice that emerged from the speaker made his throat constrict with grief that 15 years had not diminished. Jack, if you're hearing this, then things have gone according to plan, which means that things have also gone very, very wrong. His father's voice was exactly as he remembered it, warm and gruff, and carrying the weight of secrets too heavy for one man to bear. I don't have time to explain everything, son. There are people watching me, people who will kill me if they discover what I've hidden here. But you need to know the truth about what I did and why I did it and what I need you to do to make it right. The message continued, and with each word, Jack felt another piece of his understanding of reality crumble and reshape itself into something new and terrible. 24 years ago, I was recruited by an organization called the Umbral Collective to lead a research team developing weapons that could end the Confederation War. They told me we were building defensive systems, shield technologies, things that would protect our people rather than destroy our enemies. I believed them because I wanted to believe them because the alternative was too horrible to contemplate. The recording crackled with interference, his father's voice fading in and out, as if fighting against some force that wanted to silence it. They lied, Jack. They used my research to create something monstrous. A living weapon built from the stolen life force of 1,000 prisoners of war, designed to be the most destructive force the galaxy had ever seen. When I realized what they had done, I tried to stop it. I tried to save her, to find some way to undo the horror that my work had made possible. But I was too late. By the time I understood the full scope of what the collective was doing, she had already been activated, already been sent on her first mission, already been baptized in blood that could never be washed away. Jack looked at Seraphine and saw her standing rigid, her violet eyes fixed on the tablet, her silver features unreadable. She was hearing this too, hearing the confession of the man who had helped create her, and she showed no reaction beyond that terrible stillness. I spent the rest of my career trying to find a way to help her, Jack. The nullifier was never really about wormholes or energy research. It was about giving her a chance to be something other than what they made her. It was about redemption for both of us. I hid it here because, I knew that someday she would need it, and I arranged for you to be stationed here because I knew you would have the skill and the courage to use it. The interference grew stronger, nearly drowning out the final words. Fix my mistakes, son. I couldn't save her when I had the chance, but you can. She's not a weapon. She's not a monster. She's a victim the same as all those people whose lives were stolen to create her. Give her the second chance that I couldn't. And forgive me, Jack. Forgive me for all the lies, all the secrets, all the pain that my cowardice has caused. I love you. I always have. And I believe in you even when you've stopped believing in yourself. The message ended, leaving silence that felt like the space between heartbeats. Jack stood motionless, the tablet in his hands, his father's words echoing through his mind like ripples in a still pond. Everything he had believed about his exile, about his disgrace, about the trajectory of his life for the past 15 years had just been rewritten by a dead man's confession. He had not been sent here as punishment. He had been positioned here as preparation. His father had been playing a game that spanned decades, moving pieces across a board that Jack was only now beginning to see. Seraphine broke the silence with a voice that was almost too soft to hear. I did not know. I knew that scientists had created me, but I never knew their names, their faces, their reasons. They kept that information from me deliberately, I think, to prevent me from developing attachments that might interfere with my function. She paused and something shifted in her alien features. Something that might have been grief. Your father. He was kind. Jack thought about the man who had raised him, the father who had taught him to fly and to fight, and to believe that one person could make a difference in a universe that seemed designed to crush hope. The man who had apparently carried the weight of an unimaginable secret for decades without ever letting it show. He was the best man I ever knew, and apparently he was carrying a burden that would have destroyed anyone else. Then perhaps you understand now why I came to you specifically. Seraphine moved closer to the nullifier, her silver hand hovering over its surface without quite touching. Not just because of the device or your skill with it, but because you are his son, and he believed that you would have the strength to do what he could not. Jack looked at her, really looked past the silver skin and the burning eyes and the terrible reputation that preceded her across the galaxy. He saw the exhaustion in the set of her shoulders, the pain in the lines around her mouth, the desperate hope that she was trying so hard to hide beneath a mask of alien composure. He saw a victim, just as his father had said, a weapon that had learned to hate what it was designed for, a monster that dreamed of being something better. 5 hours. He said the words like a promise, like an oath, like the first step on a road that would lead to either salvation or annihilation. I'll need every minute to calibrate the nullifier for your energy signature. The process is going to hurt probably more than anything you've ever experienced, and there's a real chance it won't work, that the feedback will destroy us both along with the station. I accept those terms. Jack moved to the control panel beside the nullifier and began powering up systems that had been dormant for 15 years. The device hummed to life, its rings beginning to rotate slowly as the ancient technology awakened from its long sleep. I'm not doing this because I believe in redemption or second chances or any of that philosophical garbage. His voice was hard, but something in his eyes softened as he spoke. I'm doing this because my father asked me, and because I've spent 15 years thinking I killed 47 people through my own arrogance, and now I find out it was all part of some plan I didn't understand. I'm doing this because I'm tired of being defined by someone else's narrative. Seraphine watched him work, her violet eyes following his movements with an intensity that should have been unsettling, but somehow was not. And if we survive, what then? Jack paused in his calibrations and met her gaze with a look that carried 62 years of accumulated wisdom and regret. Then we figure out the next step, one crisis at a time. That's how you survive in this universe, in my experience. You don't try to solve every problem at once. You just focus on the one in front of you and trust that the rest will sort itself out. A ghost of a smile crossed her silver features. Your father was right about you, Colonel Mercer. You do have courage. Call me Jack. If we're going to die together, we might as well be on a first-name basis. The station shook as the first Umbral scout ship entered weapons range and opened fire. The first volley from the Umbral scout ship tore through the station's outer hull like a hot knife through paper. Jack grabbed the edge of the control console as the floor bucked beneath him, alarms screaming from every speaker, emergency lights painting the storage bay in pulsing crimson. The nullifier's calibration sequence flickered dangerously on his display, 3% complete, and climbing at a pace that suddenly seemed impossibly slow. Seraphine moved toward the breach before he could stop her, her silver form cutting through the smoke and debris with predatory grace. Amethyst energy crackled along her arms as she raised her hands toward the gaping wound in the station's structure, and for a moment Jack thought she was going to counterattack, to unleash the terrible power that had made her legend across the galaxy. Instead, she wove a barrier of shimmering light across the breach, sealing the rupture with a membrane of pure psionic force that held the vacuum at bay. The effort cost her visibly, her luminous skin dimming to gray as she diverted energy from her failing core to maintain the shield. The hull integrity is compromised in 17 locations. Her voice carried strain that she could not quite conceal. I can hold them for now, but each repair drains what little stability I have left. You need to work faster, Jack. He was already moving his fingers, flying across the calibration interface as he rerouted power from non-essential systems to accelerate the process. The station's point defense batteries came online, automatically spitting streams of directed energy at the scout ship that was circling for another attack run. Most of the shots went wide, the targeting systems too outdated to track a vessel moving at combat speeds, but a few found their mark and sent the enemy craft spinning away to reassess its approach. I need baseline readings from your energy signature. Jack pulled a sensor wand from the equipment rack and crossed to where Seraphine stood maintaining her barrier. This is going to feel invasive. The scanner has to penetrate your outer field to get accurate measurements. Do what you must. He pressed the wand against her shoulder, and the device immediately began shrieking with overload warnings. The readings that scrolled across his tablet were unlike anything he had ever seen. Energy levels that should have been impossible for a biological entity. Fluctuation patterns that defied the fundamental laws of thermodynamics. Her psionic core was not just unstable, it was actively fighting against the constraints of physical reality, trying to expand into dimensions that human science had only theorized might exist. Your father's notes mentioned this, Seraphine spoke through gritted teeth as the scanner probed deeper into her failing systems. The energy that powers me does not originate in this universe. It bleeds through from somewhere else, somewhere that operates under different rules. The containment matrix that the collective built into my body was designed to filter and regulate that flow, but it was never meant to last forever. Jack processed this information while adjusting the scanner parameters to compensate for the dimensional interference. How long were you supposed to last? According to their design specifications, 5 years. I have exceeded my intended operational lifespan by 18 years through sheer force of will. A bitter smile crossed her silver features. They did not account for the possibility that their weapon might develop a desire to survive. The scout ship made another pass this time, focusing its fire on the station's communication array. Jack watched helplessly as the antenna cluster erupted in a shower of sparks and molten metal, cutting off his ability to send distress signals to anyone who might be close enough to help. Kessler was isolating them, ensuring that whatever happened in the next few hours would happen without witnesses or interference. Tell me about them. Jack returned to the nullifier console and began inputting the baseline readings. The people who made you. I need to understand their methodology if I'm going to reverse engineer a solution. Seraphine was silent for a long moment, her purple eyes fixed on something that existed only in memory. When she spoke, her voice had changed, becoming distant and hollow, as if she were narrating events that had happened to someone else. I remember waking. That is my earliest memory, the moment of my creation. I opened my eyes and saw a chamber filled with tanks, 1,000 tanks arranged in perfect rows, each one containing a human body suspended in fluid. They were prisoners, Jack. Soldiers captured during the border conflicts, civilians taken from colonies that had been designated as acceptable losses. Men and women and children, their lives measured and weighed and found wanting by people who believed that the mathematics of war justified any atrocity. The calibration sequence reached 8%. Jack kept working, but his hands had begun to tremble. I watched them die. One by one, their life force was extracted and channeled into me. Their memories and hopes and fears compressed into raw energy that my body absorbed like a sponge drinking water. I felt each death as a separate agony, 1,000 individual extinctions that burned themselves into whatever passes for my soul. By the time the process was complete, I contained multitudes, but I was utterly alone. You remember them? The people who died to create you. Every single one. Seraphine's voice cracked on the words. I carry them with me always, their faces, their final thoughts, the names they screamed as the machines drained them dry. They are the ghosts that haunt my every waking moment, the chorus of accusation that reminds me what I am and how I came to be. Jack thought about his own ghosts, the 47 faces that visited him in his dreams, the names he traced on the inside of his father's dog tag case every night before sleep. He had believed that his burden was heavy, had spent 15 years staggering under its weight, but compared to what Seraphine carried, his guilt was a pebble beside a mountain. After my creation, they trained me. She continued the story without prompting, as if the words had been dammed up for too long and now refused to be contained. Not with instruction or explanation, but with pain. They discovered that my psionic abilities responded to emotional stimuli, that trauma and suffering made me stronger. So they hurt me systematically and scientifically, mapping my responses and calibrating my development according to charts and graphs that reduced my agony to data points. The station shuddered again as the scout ship found a new angle of attack. Jack diverted more power to the point defense systems and watched the calibration percentage tick upward with agonizing slowness. 12%, 13. When I had grown powerful enough to be useful, they sent me on my first mission. A colony world called Verdant 3 had declared independence from the collective sphere of influence. My handlers gave me simple instructions: eliminate the population, leave no survivors, make an example that would discourage other worlds from similar defiance. Seraphine's barrier flickered as her concentration wavered, and Jack saw tears streaming down her silver cheeks, leaving trails of luminescent moisture that evaporated before they could reach her jaw. I killed them all, 60,000 people in less than an hour. Men, women, children, the elderly, the sick, anyone who drew breath within the colony's boundaries. I burned them with purple fire, crushed them with waves of force, tore their minds apart with psionic attacks that left their bodies intact but their consciousness shattered. And when it was over, when I stood alone in the ashes of what had been a thriving community, I felt nothing but the satisfaction of a job well done. That was what they programmed you to feel. Jack spoke without looking up from his work, his voice steady despite the horror of what he was hearing. That was the conditioning, not you. Perhaps, but the conditioning began to crack on my seventh mission. Seraphine's voice strengthened, finding something that sounded almost like hope. Another colony world, another population marked for termination. I had completed 93% of the objective when I found her. A child no more than 6 years old, hiding in the wreckage of a building that I had just destroyed. She was crying, calling for parents who were already dead, and something in me broke. The calibration reached 20%. Jack finally looked up, meeting her luminous gaze with eyes that held no judgment. I could not kill her. I stood there with enough power to crack the planet's crust, and I could not bring myself to harm one small child. The handlers were screaming in my communications implant, demanding that I complete the objective, threatening me with punishments that they knew from experience would be effective. But I refused. I gathered her in my arms and carried her to safety, and then I told my handlers that the objective was complete, that there were no survivors. You lied to them. I chose. For the first time in my existence, I made a decision that was mine alone, not programmed into me, not beaten into me, not demanded by the creatures who claimed ownership of my body and soul. I chose to save one life instead of taking it, and in that moment I discovered that I was more than what they had made me. Jack felt something shift in his chest, a loosening of the armor he had built around his heart over 15 years of isolation. He recognized what she was describing because he had experienced something similar himself, the moment when a soldier realized that following orders was not the same as doing right, that the chain of command did not absolve individual responsibility. The child, what happened to her? I placed her with a family on a neutral world, arranged for her care and education through intermediaries who never knew my true identity. I have watched over her from afar for 17 years now. She is a teacher working with orphans from the border conflicts. She has no memory of me, no knowledge of how close she came to death or who saved her. But I remember. I remember her face every time I am tempted to surrender to what they made me. The station's internal sensors screamed a new warning, and Jack's blood ran cold as he processed the data. Someone was accessing the station's systems from an external source, bypassing security protocols with codes that should not have existed outside the highest levels of military intelligence. He is inside our networks. Seraphine's voice hardened with recognition. Kessler, he is using command overrides that predate my creation. The collective has been planning this for a very long time. Jack tried to lock out the intrusion, but the codes were too deeply embedded, too fundamentally integrated with the station's architecture. Doors began opening and closing at random, atmospheric systems fluctuated wildly, and the point defense batteries suddenly went offline, leaving them defenseless against the scout ship that was even now lining up for another attack run. The calibration. Seraphine moved toward him, her barrier dissolving as she redirected her remaining energy. How much longer? 3 hours minimum, assuming I can keep the nullifier powered through whatever Kessler is doing to our systems. Jack hammered commands into the console, trying to isolate the device from the station's compromised network. The process requires a stable power supply and precise environmental controls. If either one fluctuates beyond acceptable parameters, we'll have to start over from scratch. The communication system crackled to life, and a voice that Jack had not heard in 12 years filled the storage bay with memories of brotherhood and betrayal. Jack, it's been too long, old friend. Victor Kessler's face materialized on the wall display, older than Jack remembered, but still carrying the sharp intelligence and easy charisma that had made him one of the most decorated officers in the fleet. His uniform bore insignia that Jack did not recognize, symbols of an organization that operated in the shadows between legitimate governments. Victor, Jack forced his voice to remain steady. I'd say it's good to see you, but we both know that would be a lie. Always the honest one. That's what I admired about you, Jack. That unshakable integrity that made you such a liability to anyone who needed flexible morality. Kessler's smile was warm and genuine, which somehow made it worse. I'm sorry about the hostile approach. My people got a little overeager. You know how it is with junior officers always trying to prove themselves. Your people just killed my communication array and compromised my station systems. Forgive me if I'm not feeling particularly receptive to apologies. Fair enough. Kessler leaned back in his command chair, the image of relaxed confidence. Let's skip the pleasantries and get to business. You have something I want, Jack. Someone, rather. The woman standing next to you represents the culmination of 25 years of research and development, an investment of resources that would make most planetary economies weep with envy. I'm here to collect that investment. Seraphine stepped into frame, her silver features composed despite the visible deterioration of her physical condition. Admiral Kessler, I had hoped never to see you again. The feeling is not mutual, my dear. You are quite literally the most valuable object in the galaxy. The collective has spent the last 3 years preparing for your eventual return, building the infrastructure necessary to harvest your genetic template and produce a new generation of weapons based on your design. Imagine it, Jack. 1,000 Seraphines, each one capable of ending wars with a thought, all of them loyal to the collective's vision of galactic peace through absolute power. Jack felt sick. That's not peace, Victor. That's slavery enforced at the point of a gun. Is there any other kind? Kessler's voice hardened, the mask of friendship slipping to reveal something colder beneath. Peace is an illusion, Jack. It always has been. The strong impose their will on the weak, and the only variable is how much suffering occurs before the weak accept their place. The collective offers a shortcut, a way to achieve stability without the messy centuries of gradual conquest. One decisive stroke, and the fighting ends forever. Along with freedom, self-determination, and everything else that makes life worth living. Small prices for the elimination of war. Kessler waved a dismissive hand. But I didn't contact you to debate philosophy. I contacted you to make an offer. Surrender Seraphine within the next 2 hours, and I will allow you to live. More than that, I will restore your reputation, clear your name, give you back everything that was taken from you after Bengalo. You could return to Earth a hero, Jack. All it costs is one broken weapon that's going to die anyway. The words hung in the air like poison, and Jack felt the weight of 15 years of exile pressing down on his shoulders. Everything he had lost, everyone who had turned their backs on him, all of it could be undone with a single act of betrayal. The temptation was real, more real than he wanted to admit. He looked at Seraphine, at the fading light in her eyes, at the cracks spreading across her silver skin as her containment continued to fail. She met his gaze without expectation, without pleading, simply waiting for him to make the choice that would determine both their fates. Bengalo. Jack's voice emerged flat and cold. You mentioned Bengalo. Tell me something, Victor. The equipment failure that caused the accident, the malfunction that killed 47 people and destroyed my career. Was that really a malfunction? Kessler's expression flickered just for an instant, but it was enough. I wondered if you would figure it out eventually. You always were too smart for your own good, Jack. The Admiral's smile turned predatory. Yes, I sabotaged the experiment. You were becoming a problem, asking questions about projects that were supposed to remain classified, getting too close to discoveries that the collective needed to control. Removing you from the equation required a sacrifice, and 47 lives seemed like a reasonable price for protecting a secret that could have destabilized half the galaxy. Jack's vision went red. 15 years of guilt, 15 years of nightmares, 15 years of carrying the weight of deaths that he had not caused. All of it had been manufactured by the man he once called brother. You murdered 47 innocent people to frame me. I eliminated 47 potential security risks and neutralized a dangerous variable in a single efficient operation. Kessler's voice carried no remorse, no acknowledgement that he was discussing human lives rather than chess pieces. It was nothing personal, Jack. Just the cost of doing business in a universe that rewards pragmatism over sentiment. The transmission cut off, replaced by a timer counting down from 2 hours. Kessler's ultimatum was now official, a deadline measured in minutes and seconds rather than words. Jack stood motionless, his hands clenched into fists, his entire body vibrating with rage that he had not felt since the day they stripped his rank and sent him into exile. Everything he had believed about himself, about his failure, about the weight of responsibility that had crushed him for 15 years, had been built on lies constructed by a man he trusted. Jack, Seraphine's voice cut through the red haze of his fury, I need to show you something. Before you decide what to do next, there is a memory you must see. She extended her hand toward him, silver fingers glowing with soft purple light. The calibration requires a consciousness anchor, someone whose mind can serve as a reference point for stabilizing my psionic field. This means we must establish a direct mental link, and through that link, you will have access to my memories. All of them, including one that I have kept hidden for 20 years. Jack stared at her hand, understanding the magnitude of what she was offering. A direct link to a consciousness that contained the compressed experiences of 1,000 stolen lives plus 23 years of atrocities committed in the name of peace. The human mind was not designed to process that volume of information. Previous attempts at such connections had driven the human participants insane or killed them outright. 6 people have tried to establish mental links with me. Seraphine confirmed his unspoken fear. 3 died instantly when their brains overloaded. 2 survived but lost all higher cognitive function. 1 remained conscious long enough to scream for 6 hours before his heart gave out. And you think I'll be different? I think you have spent 62 years building walls in your mind, compartmentalizing trauma, learning to function, despite carrying burdens that would have broken weaker souls. Her amethyst eyes held his with unwavering intensity. I think that if anyone can survive what I am about to show you, it is the man who endured Bengalo Rift and 15 years of unjust exile without surrendering to despair. Jack took her hand. The universe exploded into fragments of light and memory, a kaleidoscope of experiences that tore through his consciousness like a hurricane through a paper house. He felt 1,000 deaths in a single heartbeat, lived 1,000 lives in the space between one breath and the next. The ghost that haunted Seraphine's existence rushed through him in a torrent of faces and names and final moments, each one searing itself into his memory with the permanence of a brand. Then the chaos focused, narrowing to a single thread of experience that pulled him backward through time. He was Seraphine, 20 years younger, standing in the wreckage of a passenger transport that had been intercepted in neutral space. Bodies lay scattered among the debris, civilians who had made the mistake of traveling through a sector that the collective had designated as a free-fire zone. Her handlers were giving her instructions through the implant in her skull, ordering her to eliminate any survivors who might report the attack to authorities. A sound drew her attention to a pile of twisted metal near the transport's breached hull. Not crying this time, but a voice hoarse and broken, calling a name over and over. A woman's name. She moved toward it with the mechanical efficiency of a weapon completing its programmed function, ready to end another life in service of objectives that she did not question. The man was in his early 40s, dark-haired with the first streaks of gray at his temples, his face streaked with blood from a gash on his forehead. He wore the remnants of a military dress uniform, metal still pinned to a chest that heaved with grief rather than fear. He was crouched beside the body of a woman who had obviously been his wife, his hands still clutching hers even though she had stopped breathing. His gray eyes stared at nothing, seeing only the face of the woman he had loved and lost. Seraphine raised her hand, energy gathering at her fingertips. One more death among thousands. One more name to add to the chorus of ghosts that followed her everywhere. The handlers were already moving on to other targets, trusting their weapon to complete this minor task without supervision. But the man looked up, and instead of fear or hatred, she saw something that stopped her cold. Recognition, not of her specifically, but of what death looked like when it came wearing a familiar face. This soldier had buried friends and enemies alike. He had held dying men in his arms and promised them that their sacrifice meant something. He did not beg or plead or try to run. He simply met her gaze with eyes that were already dead inside and waited for the physical reality to catch up with the spiritual truth. Just make it quick. His voice emerged raw, scraped hollow by grief. She was everything. Without her, there's nothing left worth protecting. Something cracked inside Seraphine. The same fracture that had saved the child on the colony world resonated again, deeper this time, more fundamental. This was not innocence that she would be destroying. This was a man who had already lost everything that mattered to him, who was asking for death as a mercy rather than a punishment. She could not do it. The handlers screamed in her mind, demanding compliance, threatening consequences. She ignored them. Instead, she reached down and pulled the man to his feet, her silver hands gentle, despite the power they contained. She half-carried him to an escape pod that had somehow survived the attack, programmed it to reach the nearest inhabited station, and launched it before her handlers could override her actions. Then she reported that the cleanup was complete, that there were no survivors, that the mission was successful. The memory shifted, becoming a montage of surveillance and protection spanning 2 decades. Seraphine watching from orbit as the man was retrieved by rescue services, following his slow recovery from the grief that had nearly consumed him. Observing his return to military service with a new intensity, a need to prove that his wife's death had not been meaningless. Feeling something that might have been admiration when he threw himself into the Nullifier project, channeling his loss into creation rather than destruction. She had been there when the Bengalo Rift experiment went wrong, hidden in the void just beyond sensor range, close enough to intervene if the catastrophe had threatened his life. She had watched him accept the blame for deaths he did not cause, had seen the tribunal strip away his rank and reputation while the real killer walked free. She had followed his journey to Outpost 17 and maintained a silent vigil over his isolation, a guardian angel that he never knew existed. For 20 years, the most dangerous weapon in the galaxy had been watching over a broken soldier who reminded her that even weapons could choose mercy. Jack emerged from the memory link, gasping, his mind reeling from the implications of what he had witnessed. He was on his knees without remembering how he got there. Seraphine's hand still clasped in his, her luminous eyes watching him with an expression that contained equal measures of hope and resignation. "You saved me." The words came out, broken, barely audible. 20 years ago. That was the transport carrying me and Sarah back from our anniversary trip. That was me holding her body. I did not know who you were then. I only knew that I could not add your grief to my collection of horrors. Seraphine knelt beside him, bringing her face level with his. It was only later, when I began to research your history, that I discovered the connection to your father and his work. When I understood that the widower I had spared might one day be able to return the favor. Is that why you came here? Because you knew I owed you? I came here because you are the only person who can operate the nullifier. The debt between us is irrelevant. She paused, and something vulnerable flickered across her alien features. But I will not pretend that it does not give me hope. You have spent 20 years carrying guilt for deaths you did not cause. I have spent 20 years carrying guilt for deaths I did cause. Perhaps we can find redemption together, or perhaps we will simply find an end. Either way, we face it as equals. The station shook violently as multiple impacts struck the hull in rapid succession. Jack's tablet erupted with warnings as he pulled himself to his feet, the tactical display showing 2 Umbral destroyers breaking from Kessler's formation and accelerating toward Outpost 17 at attack speed. He's not waiting for the deadline. Jack sprinted toward the nullifier console, his personal crisis suddenly irrelevant in the face of immediate tactical necessity. Kessler's sending his heavy hitters early. Seraphine was already moving toward the airlock, her diminished form somehow finding reserves of strength that should not have existed. I will buy you time. Continue the calibration. You can barely maintain a hull breach barrier. Taking on 2 destroyers will kill you. Then I will die fighting instead of waiting. She paused at the airlock threshold, looking back at him with eyes that burned with determination. But I do not intend to die today, Jack Mercer. I have spent 20 years watching over you. I would very much like the opportunity to do so for 20 more. She stepped into the airlock and cycled through to the void beyond. Jack watched her go, then turned back to the console with renewed purpose. The calibration was at 31%. He needed to push it faster to find shortcuts that the original design had not anticipated to perform miracles of engineering improvisation while his station was being torn apart around him. Through the observation port, he saw Seraphine engage the first destroyer. Purple lightning erupted from her silver form, tearing through the warship's shields and carving deep wounds in its armored hull. The vessel returned fire with everything it had, energy beams and missile salvos converging on her position, but she danced through the barrage with grace that defied physics, her body bending space itself to avoid destruction. The second destroyer moved to flank her, and Jack saw her stumble as she tried to divide her attention between two threats. A beam struck her shoulder, spinning her backward, and for a terrible moment, he thought it was over. Then she screamed. The sound was not audible in vacuum, but Jack felt it in his mind, a psychic pulse of rage and defiance that made his skull throb with sympathetic vibration. Amethyst energy exploded outward from Seraphine's body in a sphere of annihilation that caught the first destroyer dead center and tore it apart from the inside out. The second destroyer broke off its attack and retreated at maximum speed, but not before launching a final salvo that struck the station's habitat module with devastating force. Jack was thrown against the console as the floor heaved beneath him, alarms screaming warnings about life support failures and structural integrity breaches. When he pulled himself upright, his tablet showed an incoming vessel on an intercept course. For a moment, he thought it was another Umbrella attacker, but the signature was wrong, smaller and faster, and transmitting an identification code that made his heart lurch with surprise. Maya Chen's voice crackled through the damaged communication system. "Colonel Mercer, this is Lieutenant Chen, requesting emergency docking clearance. I brought supplies and reinforcements. Permission to come aboard." Jack laughed, a sound that surprised him with its genuineness. "Chen, what the hell are you doing here? This is a combat zone." "With respect, sir, I noticed that combat zone on my sensors 3 hours ago and decided that you probably needed backup more than Armstrong Station needed another junior tactical officer. Permission to dock. Granted, Bay 3 is the only one still functional." He watched Maya's shuttle slip through the debris field and lock onto the station's remaining docking port. 30 seconds later, she was aboard carrying a military-grade medical kit and an expression of fierce determination that reminded him painfully of his younger self. "Sir, I brought emergency repair supplies and medical equipment. I also have updated tactical data on Umbral fleet deployments that you're going to want to see." Her eyes found Seraphine through the observation port, the silver woman now drifting motionless in space, her reserves clearly exhausted by the battle. "Is that who I think it is?" "Long story. Right now, I need you to help me accelerate this calibration process before Kessler sends his remaining ships to finish what the destroyers started." Maya moved to the secondary console without hesitation, her fingers already flying across the interface as she assessed the situation. "Calibration at 47%. I can optimize the power distribution to gain us maybe 30 minutes, but Colonel, these readings are insane. Whatever you're trying to stabilize has more energy than a small star." "That's a fairly accurate description, actually." Jack worked alongside her, coordinating their efforts with the wordless efficiency of two minds focused on a common goal. "Maya, before this goes any further, you need to understand what you're getting into. Kessler is Umbral Collective. He murdered 47 people to frame me for Bengalo Rift. And the woman out there is quite possibly the most dangerous being in the galaxy, but she's also the only thing standing between us and an invasion fleet." Maya absorbed this information without missing a keystroke. "So we're committing treason by harboring a fugitive from a shadow organization that has compromised the highest levels of military command while trying to save the life of an alien weapon of mass destruction who may or may not explode and kill 80 million people if we fail. That about sums it up." She grinned, and in that moment, Jack saw something of himself reflected back, the young officer who had believed that doing right mattered more than doing safe. "Sounds like Tuesday, sir. What do you need me to do?" The calibration counter ticked upward, 60%, 61. Outside, Seraphine began the long drift back toward the station, her silver form barely visible against the star-strewn darkness. 3 Umbral warships remained at the edge of sensor range waiting, and somewhere among them, Victor Kessler was planning his next move. The airlock cycled open and Seraphine collapsed into Jack's arms, her silver skin now more gray than luminous, her violet eyes flickering like dying embers. He caught her weight against his chest and felt the wrongness radiating from her body, the unstable energy that pulsed beneath her flesh, like a second heartbeat racing toward catastrophic failure. Maya was already there with the medical scanner running diagnostics that made her face go pale. Colonel, her containment is at 12% and dropping. Whatever she did out there accelerated the degradation by a factor of 6. We have maybe 90 minutes before complete failure. Jack half carried Seraphine toward the nullifier chamber, his old muscles screaming in protest, but refusing to surrender to the weakness that age had imposed upon them. She tried to walk on her own, her pride demanding independence, even as her body betrayed her, but after 3 steps, her legs buckled, and she had no choice but to accept his support. The calibration. Her voice emerged as a ragged whisper. How close? 61% when you went outside. Maya's been optimizing the power distribution while you were playing hero. Not hero. Seraphine's lips curved into something that might have been a smile. Just buying time. It is the only currency I have ever been good at spending. They reached the chamber, and Jack lowered her onto the activation platform, the same spot where his father's device waited to either save her life or end it. The nullifier hummed with potential energy, its rings rotating slowly as the calibration sequence continued its inexorable progress. 63% now, 64. The station shuddered as another impact struck the outer hull, and Jack's tactical display showed the remaining 3 Umbral warships moving into assault formation. Kessler had finished waiting. The final attack was beginning. They're launching boarding pods. Maya's voice cut through the chaos with military precision. 6 pods, 12 soldiers each. They'll breach the hull in approximately 4 minutes. Jack moved to the weapons locker and began distributing sidearms with the efficiency of a man who had done this 1,000 times before. He pressed a pistol into Maya's hands and met her eyes with a look that carried the weight of everything he had never been able to teach her through messages and video calls. You remember what I told you about close-quarters combat in confined spaces? Move fast, stay low, never stop moving until the threat is neutralized, or you are. Maya checked her weapon with hands that trembled only slightly. I remember, sir. Good, because theory is about to become practice. The first boarding pod breached the hull 3 levels above them, the sound of tearing metal echoing through the station's corridors like the scream of a dying animal. Jack positioned himself at the chamber's main entrance, while Maya covered the secondary access point, both of them forming a defensive perimeter around Seraphine and the nullifier. Jack, Seraphine's voice stopped him as he was checking his weapons charge. If they break through, if it becomes clear that you cannot hold them, I want you to take Maya and leave. Use the escape pod in Section 7. I will delay them long enough for you to reach safe distance. Absolutely not. This is not a request. I am dying regardless of what happens here. Your life and Maya's life still have value, still have purpose. Do not waste them on a cause that is already lost. Jack turned to face her, and in his eyes she saw something that she had never expected to find in a human being. Not pity, not fear, not the calculated assessment of a tactician weighing costs against benefits. What she saw was recognition, the look of one damaged soul acknowledging another. Nobody gets left behind. That's been my rule since my first day in uniform, and I'm too old and too stubborn to start making exceptions now. The first Umbral soldier appeared in the corridor, his weapon already raised and firing. Jack dropped him with a single shot and moved to cover as return fire scorched the air where he had been standing. More soldiers poured through the breach, their black armor absorbing the harsh emergency lighting and making them seem like shadows given lethal form. Maya proved that her training had been more than theoretical. She moved through the firefight with the grace that surprised even Jack, her shots precise and economical. Her positioning always one step ahead of where the enemy expected her to be. 2 soldiers fell to her weapon before they even realized she was there. But there were too many of them, and more kept coming. Jack took a round to his left shoulder, the impact spinning him against the wall and sending his weapon clattering across the floor. He retrieved it with his right hand and kept firing, ignoring the blood that was now soaking through his uniform, and the white-hot agony that accompanied every movement. Colonel, Maya moved to cover him, her own position now dangerously exposed. You're hit. I've had worse. Focus on the mission. The soldiers pushed forward, their superior numbers beginning to tell. Jack and Maya were forced back step by step until they were standing directly in front of the nullifier platform, the last line of defense between Seraphine and the men who wanted to turn her into a template for an army of living weapons. Then the assault stopped. The remaining soldiers parted like water around a stone, and Victor Kessler walked through their ranks with the casual confidence of a man who had already won. He was shorter than Jack remembered, age having compressed his frame just as it had compressed Jack's, but his eyes still held the sharp intelligence that had made him one of the most dangerous men in the fleet. "Stand down, Jack. It's over." Kessler's voice carried genuine regret, or at least a convincing simulation of it. "You fought well, better than I expected, but the math doesn't work in your favor. You're wounded, outnumbered, and defending someone who's going to die anyway. There's no victory condition here." Jack kept his weapon raised despite the trembling in his arm and the blood loss that was making his vision swim. "Maybe not, but there's still a choice condition, and I choose not to hand her over to you." "Sentiment, always your weakness." Kessler shook his head with something that looked almost like affection. "You never could separate emotional attachment from tactical necessity. It's why you never made General Jack. Too much heart, not enough calculation. And you never understood that the heart is what makes the calculation worth doing." Jack's finger tightened on the trigger. "You can kill me, Victor. You probably will. But you won't break me, and you won't make me betray someone who trusted me with her life." Kessler studied him for a long moment, and something flickered in those cold, intelligent eyes. Not doubt exactly, but perhaps recognition of a limit that even his pragmatism could not overcome. "You know what I find interesting about you, Jack? Even now, even knowing what I did to you, what I took from you, you're not consumed by hatred. You should want to kill me more than you want to save her. You should be burning with the need for revenge. But you're not, are you? You're still thinking about the mission, about the lives at stake, about everything except your own justified anger." "Revenge is a luxury. I learned that a long time ago." Jack's voice hardened. "And you're not worth the energy it would cost." Kessler laughed, a genuine sound of amusement that seemed wildly inappropriate given the circumstances. "There it is. That's the Jack Mercer I remember. The man who could insult you with perfect politeness while shooting you in the face." He gestured to his soldiers. "Take them alive. The woman too, if possible. I want the nullifier intact and operational within the hour." The soldiers moved forward, and Jack prepared to make his last stand. Seraphine's voice cut through the chaos like a blade through silk. "Wait!" Everyone froze, including Kessler, as the Silver Woman rose from the activation platform on legs that should not have been able to support her weight. Violet energy crackled along her arms and shoulders, unstable, but undeniably present, a reminder that even diminished, she was still the most dangerous being in the room. "You want me, Admiral? You have always wanted me ever since you first saw what I could do. I am the key to your dreams of galactic domination, the template for the army that will enforce your vision of peace through terror." She took a step toward him, and even Kessler's soldiers flinched back. "I will give you what you want. I will surrender myself to your custody and cooperate with whatever procedures you require. In exchange, you will allow Jack Mercer and Maya Chen to leave the station unharmed." "Seraphine, no." Jack tried to move toward her, but his wounded body betrayed him, and he stumbled against the console. "This is not your decision, Jack." Her violet eyes found his, and in them he saw a peace that broke his heart. "You have already given me more than I ever expected to receive. You believed in me when no one else would. You treated me as a person when the entire galaxy saw only a weapon. Let me repay that gift with the only currency I have left." Kessler considered the offer with the careful calculation of a man who had spent his life evaluating risks and rewards. "An interesting proposal. But how do I know you won't simply destroy my ships the moment your friends are clear? Because I will be dead before they reach safe distance." Seraphine's voice carried no self-pity, only statement of fact. "My containment will fail completely within the next 30 minutes. Whatever you intend to do with my genetic template, you will need to do it quickly, because I will not survive long enough to be a threat to anyone." The Admiral smiled, and it was the smile of a predator who had finally cornered his prey. "Acceptable terms. Soldiers escort Colonel Mercer and Lieutenant Chen to the escape pod in Section 7. ensure they are not harmed during transport. No, Jack forced himself upright, his wounded arm hanging useless at his side, but his voice still carrying the command authority of a lifetime in uniform. I won't leave her. Jack. Maya's hand found his shoulder, her grip firm despite the fear in her eyes. Maybe we should. I said no. He shook off her grip and faced Kessler with the defiance of a man who had already lost everything and therefore had nothing left to fear. You want to know the difference between us, Victor? It's not tactics or strategy or willingness to make hard choices. It's this: I would rather die standing beside someone I believe in than live knowing I abandoned them to save myself. Kessler's smile faded. That's not courage, Jack. That's suicide. Maybe, but it's my suicide to commit. Jack turned to the nullifier console, his fingers moving across the interface with desperate speed. Maya, I need you to reroute all remaining power to the device. Everything we have, life support, gravity, environmental controls, all of it. Sir, if I do that, we'll have maybe 10 minutes of breathable air. Then we better work fast. Maya hesitated for only a moment before moving to comply. The station's lights dimmed as power flowed away from non-essential systems and into the nullifier at its calibration percentage, jumping from 71 to 78 in a matter of seconds. Kessler's expression shifted from amusement to concern. What are you doing, Jack? Something you never understood how to do, Victor. I'm taking a leap of faith. Jack pulled up the technical specifications his father had hidden in the device's memory core, the emergency protocols that Thomas Mercer had designed for exactly this scenario. The nullifier can be activated before full calibration if you provide it with an alternative stabilization source. A consciousness anchor, my father called it. A human mind connected directly to the psionic field, serving as a reference point for the containment matrix. That's insane, Seraphine's voice cracked with alarm. The feedback would destroy you. No human mind can withstand direct exposure to my energy field for more than a few seconds. Then I guess I'll have to be quick. Jack met her eyes, and in that moment, all the barriers he had built over 62 years of disappointment and loss fell away. You saved my life 20 years ago, Seraphine. You've been watching over me ever since, protecting me from shadows I never knew existed. Now it's my turn. He activated the connection before she could stop him. The world exploded into light and agony and something beyond either. Jack felt his consciousness expand beyond the boundaries of his skull, merging with an energy field that contained the compressed experiences of 1,000 stolen souls. Memories that were not his own flooded through his mind, lives and deaths, and everything in between, a torrent of human experience that threatened to sweep away everything that made him Jack Mercer. But he had spent 62 years learning how to endure. He found the core of his identity and held on to it with the same stubborn determination that had carried him through wars and disasters and 15 years of unjust exile. He was Jack Mercer, son of Thomas Mercer's colonel in the United States Air Force, a man who had made mistakes and paid for them and was still standing despite everything the universe had thrown at him. He was the anchor. The nullifier activated with a sound like reality tearing at the seams. White light erupted from the device, washing over Seraphine's failing body and penetrating to the unstable core that was threatening to destroy everything within a dozen light years. Jack felt her pain as if it were his own, felt the chaotic energy that was consuming her from within, and he did the only thing he knew how to do. He held on. The calibration jumped to 85%, 90, 95. Kessler was screaming orders to his soldiers, commanding them to stop the process, to kill Jack, to do something before it was too late. But they could not get close. The energy field surrounding the nullifier, repelling them like leaves in a hurricane, and all they could do was watch as the impossible unfolded before their eyes. 100%. The light reached a crescendo that made the heart of a star seem dim by comparison, and then it collapsed inward, focusing into a single point centered on Seraphine's chest. She arched backward, her silver body lifting off the platform as the nullifier's containment field wrapped around her failing core and began the process of stabilization. Jack felt something tear loose inside his mind. Memories began to dissolve, faces and names and moments slipping away into the white void like sand through an hourglass. His wife's smile on their wedding day gone. His mother's voice singing him to sleep as a child gone. The taste of his first beer. The feeling of his first solo flight. The thousand small experiences that had accumulated over 6 decades of living, all of them fading into nothing. But he did not let go. He held the connection until the nullifier completed its work, until Seraphine's containment was restored, and her failing body was stable once more. He held on until there was almost nothing left of him to hold, and then he held on for one moment longer. Then the light faded and Jack Mercer collapsed to the floor. Seraphine stood transformed. Her silver skin blazed with renewed luminescence, her violet eyes burning with power that was now perfectly controlled, her body radiating strength that made her previous capabilities seem like shadows of what she had become. The nullifier had not merely stabilized her core, it had unlocked potential that her creators had never intended her to achieve. She looked at Kessler with eyes that held no hatred, only a terrible clarity. You wanted an army of weapons like me. You spent decades planning for this moment, building the infrastructure to harvest my template and create 1,000 copies that would serve your vision of order. Her voice resonated with harmonics that made the walls vibrate. But you forgot something important, Admiral. You forgot that I am not just a weapon. I am also a person, and persons have the capacity to choose. She raised her hand and violet energy lanced across the chamber to strike Kessler's command tablet. The device exploded in a shower of the sparks and molten circuitry, taking with it the encrypted files that contained her genetic template. The data is gone, destroyed beyond any possibility of recovery. Seraphine's voice carried satisfaction that was almost human. There will be no army. There will be no copies. There will be only me, and I choose to be something other than what you made me. Kessler stared at the smoking ruins of his tablet, and in his eyes something fundamental had broken. Not fear, not anger, but the hollow realization of a man who had just watched his life's work evaporate in a flash of violet light. You think this changes anything? His voice emerged thin and reedy. The collective will continue. Other weapons will be developed. The march toward order cannot be stopped by one act of defiance. Perhaps not, but it can be delayed, and delay is often enough to allow hope to take root. Seraphine turned away from him, dismissing him as if he were already irrelevant. Take your soldiers and leave, Admiral. Your ships are damaged, your mission has failed, and if you remain here any longer, I may forget my commitment to being something other than what you designed as. Kessler looked at his soldiers, at the impossible woman who had just casually destroyed everything he had worked toward, and made the only calculation that still made sense. He retreated. Maya was already kneeling beside Jack, her medical scanner running over his unconscious form, while tears streamed down her cheeks. Seraphine joined her, her silver hands gentle as they touched Jack's weathered face. Is he going to survive? His vital signs are stable, but... Maya's voice broke. The neural scans show extensive damage, massive memory loss across multiple regions of the brain. He's alive, but I don't know how much of him is left. Seraphine closed her violet eyes and reached out with senses that no human possessed. She touched Jack's mind, felt the gaps where his memories had been, the empty spaces that had once held 62 years of accumulated experience. So much was gone. His childhood, his marriage, his career, all of it dissolved into the white void of their connection. But not everything. In the center of his damaged consciousness, preserved with perfect clarity, despite the devastation surrounding them, were his memories of her. Every moment from the past 24 hours, every word she had spoken, every truth she had revealed, all of it remained intact. And interwoven with those memories, she found something else. She found herself. During the connection, without conscious intention, she had copied her own memories of watching over him into his mind, while drawing his memories of their encounter into herself. They were linked now in a way that transcended physical proximity, each carrying a piece of the other that could never be separated. He will remember me. Seraphine's voice emerged soft with wonder. He lost so much, but he will remember me. Jack's eyes fluttered open, unfocused at first, then gradually sharpening as consciousness returned. He looked at Maya and saw a young woman who seemed familiar in a way he could not quite place. He looked at his surroundings and felt the vague recognition of a place he should know, but could not name. Then he looked at Seraphine, and everything became clear. You're still here. His voice was rough, his throat raw from screaming that he did not remember doing. I don't know what I thought. Everything is confused, fragmented. I know. She helped him sit up, her silver hands warm against his skin. The connection took more from you than I anticipated. You have lost much of your past, Jack. I am sorry. He considered this information with a calm that surprised him. He should be panicking, should be terrified by the vast empty spaces in his memory where a lifetime of experiences should have been. But instead he felt strangely peaceful, as if the weight he had been carrying for so long had finally been lifted. My father's dog tags. The thought emerged from somewhere deep. Where are they? Maya retrieved the battered metal case from where it had fallen during the fighting and pressed it into his hands. Jack opened it and looked at the tags inside, reading the name etched into the metal with a familiarity that the damage to his memory could not erase. Thomas Mercer, his father, a man who had made mistakes and spent his life trying to correct them. A man who had believed in second chances. Jack closed the case and held it out to Maya. The young woman stared at him in confusion. Sir, you're the future now, Maya. You're the one who will carry on what my father started, what I tried to continue. These belong to a man who believed that one person could make a difference even when the universe seemed designed to crush that hope. His weathered face creased into a smile that held equal measures of sadness and pride. I'm giving them to you because I believe you're that person. Don't let me down. Maya took the case with trembling hands, understanding the weight of what she had just received. This was not just a piece of metal and memory. This was a legacy passed from generation to generation, a torch being handed to someone who had proven worthy of carrying it. I won't, sir. I promise. Seraphine watched the exchange with eyes that had witnessed the death of worlds and the birth of stars, and in that simple human moment, she found something that all her power had never been able to provide: connection, belonging, the sense that she was part of something larger than herself. I must go. The words emerged, reluctantly pulled from her by necessity rather than desire. The nullifier has stabilized my core, but the repair is not complete. I need to reach Nera 7 to finalize the process, and the journey will take several weeks. Jack looked at her, and despite the gaps in his memory, despite everything he had lost, the one thing he knew with absolute certainty was that he did not want her to leave. Will you come back? Seraphine knelt beside him, bringing her silver face close to his weathered features. For a long moment that she simply looked at him, memorizing every line and scar and imperfection, storing the image in the part of her consciousness that now contained his memories of their time together. I will return, Jack Mercer. I have spent 20 years watching over you from the shadows, protecting you without your knowledge, caring for you without your consent. But that is not enough anymore. When I come back, I want to stand beside you in the light. I want to build something together, something that neither of us could create alone. She leaned forward and pressed her silver lips against his forehead, a gesture of tenderness that her creators had never programmed, and that she had learned entirely on her own. Wait for me. Then she was gone, moving through the damaged station with renewed purpose, her silver form disappearing into the airlock that would take her to her ship in the long journey ahead. Jack watched her go, and despite the emptiness where his memories should have been, he felt something that was the opposite of loss. He felt possibility. He felt hope. He felt the first stirrings of a future that might actually be worth living. 6 months later, Outpost 17 had been transformed. The damaged sections had been repaired and expanded, new equipment installed, additional personnel assigned to what was now classified as a strategic training facility rather than a forgotten way station on the edge of nowhere. Jack stood in the main briefing room, surrounded by young officers who had traveled from across the sector to learn from the man who had once been called the Butcher of Bangalore, but who was now known simply as the Teacher. Maya was there too, her new rank insignia gleaming on her collar, her confidence grown in ways that made him proud, despite his inability to remember exactly when their bond had formed. The key to any successful operation is not firepower, or numbers, or technological superiority. Jack's voice carried the authority of experience, rough-edged but warm. It's connection, understanding the people beside you, trusting them to have your back, being willing to sacrifice for something larger than yourself. That's what separates soldiers from weapons. That's what makes us human. The young officers listened with the attention of people who knew they were hearing something important, something that could not be found in textbooks or tactical manuals. Jack had become what his father had always hoped he would be, a bridge between generations, a carrier of wisdom that might otherwise be lost. He was wrapping up his lecture when the station's proximity sensors triggered an alert. His heart rate spiked despite his best efforts to remain calm, and he excused himself from the briefing room with a casualness that fooled no one. The sensor display showed a single vessel approaching at high speed, its signature unlike anything in the standard databases but immediately recognizable to Jack. He had seen that energy pattern before, had felt it resonating through his consciousness during the most intense experience of his life. He made his way to the main airlock and waited. The outer door cycled. The inner door opened. She stood in the threshold, silver and magnificent, her violet eyes blazing with joy that needed no words to express. The months of separation had changed her in subtle ways, her bearing more confident, her presence more assured. But underneath all of that, she was still the woman who had knocked on his door and asked for salvation. Jack smiled, and in that smile was everything he could not say, the loneliness of the past 6 months, the hope that had sustained him through the waiting, the love that had grown in the spaces where his memories used to be. "You came back." Seraphine stepped forward and took his hands in hers, silver fingers, intertwining with weathered human flesh. Her voice emerged soft, intimate, meant for him alone. "I promised I would, and unlike the lies I once told to survive, this was a promise I intended to keep." She pulled him closer, her forehead touching his. "I have seen the galaxy, Jack. I have visited worlds of impossible beauty and witnessed wonders that would take 100 lifetimes to describe. But through all of it, in every moment I carried you with me. The memories we share, the connection we forged, it never faded. If anything, it grew stronger." Jack closed his eyes and felt the bond between them, the thread of shared consciousness that distance and time had only strengthened. He might not remember his childhood or his wedding or most of the first 62 years of his life, but he remembered her. He would always remember her. So what happens now? Seraphine pulled back just enough to meet his eyes, and in her alien features he saw something achingly human. Hope, joy, love. "Now we build that something I promised. Together." Outside the observation port, stars blazed with ancient light, indifferent to the small dramas playing out in their midst. But for two souls who had found each other against impossible odds, those distant suns seemed to shine a little brighter, as if the universe itself was blessing a connection that defied everything the galaxy had tried to make them be. Jack Mercer had lost his past. But standing there with Seraphine's hands in his, watching the stars wheel slowly outside the window of a station that had become home, he realized that the future was more than enough. Some doors close forever, but sometimes the most important ones open again.